Good evening and welcome. It's nice to see all of you here on this cold, soon-to-be raining night. I appreciate you all being here. I would like to take a minute and just recognize the city councilors who are here with us tonight also. Barry Connell, our city council president, Charlie Tonter, Ward 4 councilor, Jared Eigerman, Ward 2, Sharif Aziz, our Ward 1 councilor. Oh yes, thank you, Jim. Didn't see over there Jim McCauley, who is for the moment at large, soon to be Ward 5. And I think that's it for councilors. Oh, right in front of my face. I'm sorry, Bruce, of course. So Bruce Vogel, councilor at large. So it's really nice to have all the councilors here tonight. So the process of what we're going to run through is that we've been working with Beta Engineering. Some of you might recall that several years ago, Beta Engineering had completed an assessment of our sidewalks in the city. And each of the, where's that big map? Didn't you have a big map? Okay, I thought they had a hard copy. And they put together ward maps of all the status of all the sidewalks across the city, and each of the councilors received that. So it made sense to bring Beta Engineering back, given their level of experience and expertise in this area, and they've been working on evaluation of all of the roads within the city. The goal of that evaluation is to help us develop a workable, manageable pavement management plan as we go forward. This is something that we've been struggling with for many, many years, and we're going to run through this as our outline today, and Ethan will pick up a little bit about financing. Our another at-large counselor, Joe Devlin. Thank you, Joe, for being here. Matt, can you get him one of the handouts? And then Beta, Tony Garo will do a presentation about their assessment, and then we'll open up for questions and comments at that point. So what have we accomplished in the last 10 years? We've done 18 miles of roads paved and repaired, and 24,041 feet of new sidewalks. The list is there. All of this will be posted on the city website. In this past season, we've completed 10,000 feet of pavement, 5,000 feet of curbing, and 8,000 feet of sidewalk. We did Pleasant Street, Titcomb to Market, Spofford, Toppins Lane, Low to Summit, Merrimack Street. We had hoped to get to the paving, but we only were able to do sidewalk work, and we'll do the paving there in the spring of 2020, and on High Street, which I'll talk about in a minute. In addition, we have we received some additional pothole money, and we were able to do 190 patches and pothole repairs, which totaled a little over $1.5 million that we spent. So in terms of High Street, some of you have heard this, some of you have read about it, those of you who have been at the council meeting. We've had 2 executive sessions on this. Obviously, we are pretty upset about this mess in terms of the striping that occurred by Highway Safety. They came in to remediate all the problems with the striping, and they used this equipment here, and they caused what we say is pretty significant damage to the road. So we brought in a contracting pavement expert, ATC, who came in last week, and they collected about a dozen borings, cores of the road that are now out being tested that will give us really solid information to stand on as we move forward and work to challenge highway safety in terms of the work that they've done. We've obviously pulled in our city solicitor, KP Law, who is working with us, and our goal is to return High Street to the pre-striping condition it was in after Allied did the paving that was there. So we will continue to aggressively work on this, and there'll be more information on it. So what are some of the challenges that we're faced when it comes to dealing with paving our roads? First of all, we've had decades of deferred maintenance all across the city and declining infrastructure. And when you look at paving a road, you also have to look at what is under the ground. We have not only problems with our roads and sidewalks, but we also have infrastructure issues across the city in terms of what's under the roads, water lines, sewer lines, and gas lines. When we look at contracting, we are in the climate where we have to accept a low bid, and I'm going to just say it. That's why we wound up with highway safety. They were the low bid. They weren't the striping contractor that we've used before. We also must follow prevailing wage, and we're also really dependent on contractor schedules. We have a short paving season, and certainly it really depends on winter weather conditions. For example, if you all recall that wonderful winter of 2015, where we hit 10 feet of snow in 6 weeks, I mean, we still had mountains of snow in May. So we really lost many months of being able to do work on our streets. That doesn't always happen, thank goodness, but we certainly, that is a factor in terms of how much work we can do. We also have competing capital priorities. And we also, once we start paving, we also end up with people complaining about noise, construction, traffic, detours, accessibility, why are you doing it now, time of day, all of those kinds of issues. And we work really hard to communicate with neighborhoods regarding paving. So how are our roads and sidewalks funded today? We receive state Chapter 90 funding, and we have been advocating, many of you know, or some of you know, that I sit on the executive board of the Mass Municipal Association, which represents all municipalities across the state of Massachusetts. And we have been advocating for many, many years for an increase in Chapter 90 funds. This is the money the state gives to each of the community based on a formula on how many roads the city owns in terms of how much money they will give you in order to work on your roads and sidewalks. That formula has not been upgraded in decades, and we've really been advocating with the legislature to increase that. They put out a $200 million bond and then divide that up amongst all the communities for Chapter 90 funds. We get approximately $517,000 a year in terms of Chapter 90 funds. We have passed an ordinance in the city where 50% of our meals tax that happened in 2010 is allocated towards sidewalks, and that's approximately $300,000 a year. And then we also, depending on how the budget is going in any given fiscal year, and Ethan will go over some of the numbers over the last several years, we've been able to allocate additional money from our city budget for roads and sidewalks. We are, if you look at what's in green, these are things we currently do. Wherever possible, we will, in permitting for new developments, we will include conditions regarding sidewalks and mitigation for development. We have also developed a sidewalk partnership program, and many residents have taken advantage of that. For example, I think of Temple Street as a good example, where residents stepped up and where they didn't have brick and we wanted brick along all of Temple Street, the city will prepare and remove the curbing. The resident pays for the brick, and then we put back the curbing and finish the project. We also work on grants. For our MassWorks grant program, for example, gave us the sidewalk over on Parker Street as part of the 40R district. As other communities use betterment districts, we haven't instituted that, and right now we're working with the City Council to look at bonding and how much we can afford to do given our current bonding capacity, and also ensuring that we maintain our AAA bond rating. And now I'm going to turn this over to Ethan, who will pick up at this point and talk a little bit more about the financing. Ethan Manning, our finance director.
Good evening. So before Tony gets into really the core of the presentation, going over the conditions out there on the streets, I want to take a minute to go over funding in terms of where we've come and then what the projections are looking like going out. So these are the raw figures in terms of funding going back to FY 2009. This will be posted on the website. It's easier to look at it visually. You see here in green, that's the base Chapter 90 appropriation each year. And as Mayor Holliday said, historically, the state has budgeted $200 million per year, which is apportioned out to all the cities and towns based on a formula that's weighted on population, road miles, and also the employment base in your community. So you can see it was around 150 million statewide right after the Great Recession. The governor at the time bumped it up to 200 million, where it's been since then, with the exception of FY 2015, where the state allocated 300 million, so we saw a little bit of excess funding there. In purple, that's the meals tax, which rolled on in FY 2012. That's 0.75% of the tax that's collected at restaurants in town. And then in blue here, that's what comes out of the city budget and or free cash, as they call it in Massachusetts. And then this blue section right here was a one-time settlement that we received as a mitigation payment from the Whittier Bridge project. So I want to take a minute to explain what's up here. So the line right here in black is what I call baseline growth. Baseline growth. So basically that's your revenues each year, subtract your expenditures. This is what you're left over with. So in a perfect world, it's above this line here. You can see it dips down a little bit in FY 2024. But this is based on very conservative revenue estimates. It's based on the standard inflationary pressures that we're seeing out in the region. It's assuming school funding in line with revenue growth for the city, which historically has been about 3.1%. It makes other assumptions such as health insurance costs going up 4% and so forth. It also does include some future debt issuance, which we've identified as being needed in the near term, such as drainage and infrastructure improvements, potential upgrades to the fire station 2, the Cutter Fire Station, a high school roof partial replacement, as well as a renovation of the police dispatch center. So that's kind of our baseline, where we see it going out over the next 10 years. So below there in green and red, I forecasted out a couple models. The green would be if we took out a $2 million road and sidewalk bond. You can see how it's generally close to budget, but it does dip below our forecast for 4 or 5 years there. And then down in red, you could see what would happen if we took out a $10 million road and sidewalk bond. It's just not within the existing capacity that we have, which means we'd have to push other priorities aside, such as the ones I just talked about, to try and make this work. And I noted the carrying cost for a $2 million bond, based on interest rates in the low to mid threes, that's about $560,000. For a $10 million bond, it's about $3.02 million over the 15-year term. This is our outstanding debt. And again, this will be on the website later on. You can see that most of our debt is fairly new and will mature within the next 15 to 20 years. This year we do have a couple projects rolling off, which are the library renovation and the City Hall renovation project, which were both borrowed in 2001. But again, the bulk of it is up here at the top. The 2 school projects, the Senior Community Center, the fire trucks, of course the high school renovation, and then the stadium upgrade project. We're still paying off those for several more years. And I'll turn it over to the mayor at this point.
So at this point, Jamie, can you pull up his slideshow? It is my pleasure to introduce to you Anthony Garo. He is the Vice President and Project Manager for Beta Engineering. He specializes in the field of GIS, Public Works, Asset Management, and Transportation Planning. He has served as project manager for numerous projects, including projects involving pavement management, utility infrastructure mapping, compliance assessments, ADA and uniform traffic control devices for streets and highways, and community master plans. Tony has over 30 years of experience in the planning and public works industries, including GIS-based management systems and custom asset management tools. He brings extensive consensus-building public presentation and implementation skills. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you to Tony Garo. Thank you, Tony.
Well, thank you for that nice introduction, Mayor. 30 years. Actually, I am celebrating my 30 years at Beta in 2 weeks. Hard to believe, 3 decades with the same company, but it's been a great place to work. Before I get started, I just want to say it's been a pleasure, working with Tony and Matt and Jamie on developing the pavement management program. We've been working here in Newburyport now since I think it was 2009 when we did the first pavement management program. So we're definitely intimate with the roads and the infrastructure here in the city. There we go. So Beta, this is just a quick overview. The work that I do really on a daily basis is pavement management work, asset management work. Presenting to folks like you is typical for me. Probably every other weeknight during this fall and spring, I'm usually out doing a presentation like you're going to see tonight. So pavement management. What are the benefits of pavement management, and why should the city implement a program? Basically, the goal is to maintain your good roads, maintain those in good condition, while you're working at rehabilitating the roads that are poor condition. The information that is developed as part of the program, and there's a database component, there's a GIS mapping component to the program, so you have the tools that allow you to be proactive in your decision making rather than reactive. With respect to developing overall goals and objectives for the program, what's shown here is this is a standard deterioration curve. Really, that's really the backbone of pavement management. And what it's showing is on the left-hand side of that chart, on the top is a roadway that scores a 100, which is in excellent condition. As you work your way down to 20 or very poor, so those are roads that are in very poor condition. But there's a curve to all of this. There's a science behind developing pavement management data and how you can evaluate the information and develop a plan like we're proposing to do here in Newburyport. But ultimately, you can see that, let's see if I can point here. So right here, basically, you're starting here at 100, the road's deteriorating, and then it gets to a point here where it starts to, say, drop quickly. And that's where you want to catch roads at this point before they start to deteriorate at a faster rate, and it's going to cost you more money to improve those roadways. The system is going to provide the foundation for decision making. So you're at a critical point where now you have new data to work with. So this information that was collected is good for about a 3 to 5 year time frame before then at that point you're going to want to do new inspections. So the project that we are in the process of developing with the city, basically it's a 5-step process that we follow on projects like this. The first step is developing a database design and configuring the system. So that's basically what data do we want to collect, what type of mapping features do we want to utilize on the project, and also what are our goals related to the data that we're going to collect. So we want to consider all that before we start the data collection process. Pavement inspection program was completed in August and September. So you may have seen a vehicle driving around the city, collecting information over about a period of a week. And then from there, once that information is collected and compiled within the database, that gives us now the ability to do an analysis of the information. So there's a great deal of information now that the city has at its fingertips to utilize in the planning process. Step 4, that's next steps. We're not there yet. We're still in the data analysis phase. Now we're going to move ahead and develop a prioritized plan. And then the last step in the process is the system deployment and training, and that's where we're going to come in and install the program and provide training right at the DPS office. So the data collection program focused on the city accepted roadways, there's approximately 72.64 miles of accepted roadways. You have a total of a little over 86 miles of roadways that make up the entire city, but the inspection program focused on the 72.64 miles. So for each of those roadways that make up the 72.64 miles, there's a rating that's been established on a 0 to 100 score. So on that previous slide I showed you with the pavement deterioration curve, each roadway in the city is scored at 0 to 100, 0 being the worst, 100 being the best. We further broke that into 3 categories to help just in general planning purposes. So the roadways were broken into good, fair, and poor categories to help with analyzing and basically starting to develop the framework for the prioritization plan. Other aspects of, you can see here, other aspects of the data that's important, like the mayor mentioned, underground utilities. So that's something that needs to be considered. So you have the condition of the pavement, but you also have the underground infrastructure that's also just as important in terms of developing your decisions on your paving program. Here's some sample roadways. The way the system works is there's actually a video that was collected along all the city road miles, and there's a photo that's created every 10 feet. So when we install the system for Tony and Jamie to utilize, they're actually going to have a photo every 10 feet. They can click, see a photo. These are some examples of the photos that'll be available to them. Example of a road that's a 100, so that's obviously a road that's in very good condition. Roadway that's an 85. Then we get into the fair condition category, and you can see now how the roadways are starting to show more deterioration, more defects within the roadway. Here's a roadway that's a 74, a 56, and then we get into roadways that are in poor condition, scores a 22, and the last one there shown as an 11. So you can see how the photos range in degree of distresses that exist on the roadways. So there's a lot of photographs that are available now, so you need a lot of storage. So the data's been collected. We have all that information in a database, and now we start to decide what we want to do for maintenance, what we want to do for repairs to these roadways. So we call these different banding. You can see here that we have different colors ranging from about 75 to 100, 50 to 75, and then 0 to 50. So the 0 to 50, those roadways are in poor condition and are in need of either minor or major rehabilitation. So it's those projects are more costly. Then you move up to fair condition, preventative maintenance options, minor repairs. So the costs they're less costly. And then once you get into the roads that are good, then you can do more routine maintenance such as crack sealing or some other types of surface treatments that are available. Utilizing those repair bands, now we're able to develop some estimated costs for each of those different categories. So essentially each roadway within the city is assigned a repair and a cost associated with that repair. And what we're looking at here, again, we have the total road miles, which is 72.64, and then here's a breakdown by good, fair, and poor. And then the estimated cost to bring those roadways essentially up to 100. Now, these costs do not include, these are curb-to-curb improvements. They do not include improving sidewalks, curb ramps, underground utilities. So there'd be an additional cost on top of that to address those roadway elements. Further analyzing the information, what we're doing here is we're breaking up the roadways based upon their function within the city. And that's really driven by the traffic volumes that these roadways carry. Mass DOT provides this information, so we utilize this as a means for breaking down the information and from an analysis purpose to see where you stand in terms of the roads that carry the most amount of traffic. You can see here on the left, you've got your rating going from 50 up to 85. Your principal arterials and minor arterials scored fairly good based on the data that was collected. Your major collectors and local roads, you can see how they're at your major collectors are right at 60, and then your local roads and cul-de-sacs are just above 65. Your overall rating, like was shown on the previous slide, is at 68.40 to 100 score. So this helps you set some of your parameters for developing your prioritization plan and starting to identify which roadways are important to the city. If you're curious as far as what principal arterials are versus collectors and local roads, in terms of the volumes, ADTs for principal arterials are 5,000 to 10,000 cars per day. That's both directions. Collectors are 1,250 to 2,500 cars per day. And then down here you get into your local roadways and your cul-de-sacs, which was 500 for local roadways and 250 respectively for cul-de-sacs. And those are typically estimated numbers that are provided by the state DOT. These are roads that are examples of arterials and collectors. So Green Street, Low Street, Merrimack, Ocean Ave, Plum Island Turnpike, Pond Street, State Street, and Water Street are roadways that carry the most traffic within the city. So how does Newburyport compare to neighboring communities? So we're working in over 100 communities in Massachusetts. We're doing a lot of work here up in the Essex County region. So we have information that we can compare to similar communities within the Essex County region here. So you can see here that Newburyport, the score again was a 68.42, 72.64 miles of road, and the Chapter 90 money is about $517,000 per year. You can see how the communities measures up against other communities in the region. I don't have the names here, but just for comparison purposes, you can see other ratings in the region, the miles, and the Chapter 90 allotment. So basically we're ranging from 80 as a high score in the region down to about 58 as the low. And this data is all from within the last 2 years. So on to sidewalks and inventory. Like the mayor mentioned, we did a sidewalk inventory and assessment 2 years ago. So that included doing basically a similar process for the sidewalks and curb ramps that we did for the roadways. Everything was developed within a GIS environment, so we're able to map it and analyze it and present those nice maps that we developed for the wards. So a breakdown of the sidewalk miles, approximately 62.35 miles, and you have the majority of your materials are currently asphalt, followed by concrete. The conditions the majority are in fair condition, with the going to good, poor, and then you do have what's considered to be gaps within sidewalks, so we also identified those as well. So those are short segments of sidewalks that you could connect to improve your accessibility. And you also have done a lot of new sidewalk work, so almost 5 miles of new sidewalks within the city. And here's some relevant photographs that we took as part of the field data collection. This is a breakdown of the data by sidewalk type or material type, I should say, and it also provides the cost associated to repair those. So we made some assumptions, meaning if we went from asphalt to concrete, what that cost would be. If we go from brick to brick or concrete to concrete. So we ran some analysis. So basically we're able to, within the database, basically do different scenarios, develop different estimates based on the material types along each of the sidewalk sections. But ultimately you have, at the end of the day, here on the bottom, you can see some of the estimated costs. So if we did go ahead and basically replace all the sidewalks that are in disrepair with concrete and granite curb, which is very nice, but it's expensive, you're looking at a little over $16 million. So sidewalks are expensive. Curb ramps were also collected as part of the field data collection process. And this really is all connected to ADA compliance. So it's a requirement to upgrade your curb ramps if you're affecting the roadway. So there's about almost 800 curb ramps within the city, varying conditions. and varying levels of compliance in terms of meeting the requirements of ADA. Like I mentioned before, we have the ability to do GIS maps. So I'm going to take you through a series of maps. And this is information now that's available to help in developing the plan for the next 3-5 years. This is a map depicting the general condition that I've been talking about of the pavement. So you have your good in blue, fair in green, poor in red. We've also have the gas network available to us. So now we know, material information about gas and how that comes into play in terms of planning. Sewer, we know where sewers are, the material, the pipe size, all that information is available to compare to the road, and also water information is available as well. We have varying degrees of information available, and some of the information we know the age of the pipe, so that helps in terms of planning and realizing that we may need to check underground before we make any commitments to doing paving work. So it's important to address that prior to paving. Sidewalks, this is an example of the sidewalks. So there's a great deal of information available now within GIS. So putting all this information within our platform allows us to do some pretty sophisticated analysis. This is just one scenario that we've run, and what this is showing is it's showing, again, getting back to the overall network rating on that 0 to 100 scale. The city rating is a 68.4, so that's our current baseline number that we have in place. And then we're looking at different funding scenarios. So utilizing the condition of the roads, the cost associated with the improvements, the life improvement of those improvements, and also ongoing deterioration that's taking place. So unfortunately, as you're improving roads, you have roads that are also deteriorating. So this all is accounted for within the model. We can also account for how the improvements are distributed. Here we're showing this model where we're distributing 10% of the funding to good roads, 40% to fair, and 50% to poor. So we could modify that, run the model, and it generates a new result. So what this result is showing that based on a $2 million scenario, so if $2 million were devoted to paving improvements, meaning curb to curb, it doesn't include underground utilities or sidewalks or curb ramps, the result is you're going to see an upward swing in the city's rating, closing in on a 72 after about 5 years. On the opposite side, if you just had Chapter 90, the $517,000 available to you, you can see how you're in a pretty quick decline. So the Chapter 90 money is not enough money to maintain your roadways. So you need to add additional money to maintain your roads. Just to maintain, you need about $1.2 million. And to show any level of improvement, you need about at least 1.6, 1.5 to show a steady increase over time. So the next steps. So we're presenting the findings, evaluating the summary of the information. We're defining the needs of the city, and then ultimately developing a multi-year plan using the data that we have now in front of us. Different elements to consider. We talked about the roadway conditions. That's all new information that's been collected within the last 3 months. The roadway functional classification that I talked about, so that's the level of traffic that each roadway carries. There's something else that I haven't touched on, which is called a cost-benefit value analysis, or CBV. And what that accounts for is not just road condition, but it accounts for the volume of traffic that road carries. So basically the importance of that roadway to the community, the cost of the repair that's being suggested for that road, and the life improvement that repair has along that roadway. So different repairs add more life to a roadway. So for example, if you were going to do a mill and overlay project, that's adding, say, roughly 15 years of life to that roadway. A reclamation project, about 20 years. But that's about it now. We're only seeing about maybe 20 years of life added to a road, and that may actually be on the high side. And the reason for that is that we're seeing increased traffic volumes. We're also seeing varying degrees in how the mixes are developed, the costs associated with the mixes, the fluctuation in oil costs affects, all of this comes into play when we're developing the analysis, because ultimately the costs do vary on an annual basis. So it's basically a juggling act from year to year in terms of the cost for your hot mix. And then ultimately you have your underground utilities and then your sidewalks and curb ramps to tend with. So there's a lot of information to take into consideration when you're developing your multi-year plan. In terms of developing a training program, that's something that we're going to be working out with Tony and Jamie. But the hope is in early January we'll be installing all the data. The information is available through a platform that we've developed for the city to use. So there's a great deal of data, GIS information. Also, it's available through some different applications, so they can pull it up on their phone if they want to. So they're going to have a lot of good information at their fingertips moving forward. With that, thank you very much, and we're going to take questions. Okay.
We start with City Councilor first. Charlie? Can I just recognize Heather Shan, Ward 3 Councilor, came in also after I finished introductions. Nice to have you here.
So just to, when we walk around the city and we talk to residents all over the city, you'll have people say, look at this street, isn't it the worst in the city? And I generally say, there are a lot of streets like this, right? So what I'm interested in, first of all, is how'd you make that assessment? I saw the pictures, it looks intuitive, but is there something more than just that intuitive, take a look at it, basis for assessing which road is worse than another road? And will that be available, the methodology, in other words?
So the methodology, it's an automated methodology. So for each of the images that are collected, so there's distresses which I didn't get into the details on that. So there's different distresses that exist along each segment of road. So the way this is, it's very detailed in terms of how the data is collected. So you have information that's collected every 10 feet. So there's basically a score every 10 feet. Then you have a segment of road. So for instance, on a 100-foot segment, you've got 10 scores, which are then, there's a weighted average assigned to that 100-foot segment. And then you have multiple segments that make up each roadway. So for instance, there could be a road that has up to 20 segments that you have a score on. So the automated methodology allows us to do that across either the segment, the roadway, and then of course to the network as a whole. Oh, I'm sorry, it's based on the distresses that exist. So you have longitudinal cracking, alligator cracking, patching, potholes. All of those are considered in terms of developing the score. Yeah.
That be.
Yeah, my question is there anything in that analysis that tells the reason why? For example, if it's close to an area that has poor drainage, water's going to get underneath the lift and crack it more frequently. That may require more expensive repair involving, the removal of the water that is getting into the system. Is there analysis available to guide DPS in terms of what's causing the damage to a particular set of, a particular roadway?
So you're asking about the impacts of flooding or drainage on the defects that are visible on the surface?
Actually, some roads are just going to wear out because there's a lot of heavy traffic on them. We understand that. But some break down more rapidly because of other conditions.
Right.
And does your analysis give us any guidance in that regard?
So to do that, you would need to take some pavement cores, do some testing to find out what you have underneath the pavement. So that will identify what your base condition is, and that'll further help you define what your pavement mix should be. So you could have a road, for instance, that could have a shallow pavement depth. You know, it could be 2 or 3 inches or less in some cases. And then you could have some nice gravel base below that. Typically, if you have alligator cracking, that's typically identifying a problem with water getting underneath. That's typically the trigger for that. And then that leads to potholes.
So over the course of this conversation, we've been talking about what's under the streets, right? Be it gas lines or water lines or sewer lines. So does the program then allow for the analysis of the age of that infrastructure as well? And that all blends together and you push a button and you go, okay, well, if we're going to do this, we have a pipeline here that needs to be replaced, et cetera, et cetera.
I'd like to say it's a push of a button, but it's not. I mean, it's more, it is intuitive. However, there's, you know, it depends on the scenarios that you'd like to run. Like we have done some hypothetical scenarios based on the, you know, material of pipe, the age, so we can identify that. What we can do is tag, say, a score from a sewer pipe and attach that to the road segment itself. So you could have a sewer score, a water score, a gas score. And then that could then be part of that analysis, like the CBV. It could be computed in a similar fashion, and that could help you prioritize which roadways you can do now versus some that are going to require more work, so you'll have to push them off because you have to address the water main that was installed in 1890.
That's all integrated. That data.
Yes, all the data is integrated. It's all layered. It's all integrated, and that's our next steps are to pull all that together. Yep.
Hi, thank you. So I am a member of a pedestrian bicycle advocacy group in Newburyport, and Newburyport has adopted a complete streets policy. So what I would like to know is, has any complete streets criteria been incorporated into this study? Because I think, you know, we look at studies like this and everybody thinks, oh, it's going to cost so much money. It's going to cost, you know, $10, $20 million. And we really have to start looking at things differently, where bike and pedestrian facilities are much more important than they used to be. I mean, we did adopt the policy. We haven't really done very much in order to incorporate it, but I think we really have to start looking at it. And when we talk about the use of our streets and our sidewalks, we talk about vehicle mileage. Not only are I think we should be looking at more bike pedestrian facilities that also works into the whole area of climate change, where we should be looking at fewer vehicle miles and how can we lessen that impact on our streets and in the long run make it cheaper to maintain our streets if they're used more by bikes and pedestrians and not by vehicles. So that's a new way of looking at this problem that I really would like to see the city of Newburyport address that. And I don't see any of that in this presentation.
I can address you mentioned complete streets, and you have a prioritization plan that's been developed. I think there's you have a list of priorities that's been submitted to DOT for consideration. So that list of priorities is part of the GIS mapping. So we do know what priorities were established for the Complete Streets program, and they will be coordinated. So if you do have a priority that's been submitted to MassDOT well, again, that's going to be your next tier. so for your tier 3. So there's different levels on the Complete Streets program, but I think the program will incorporate that information. So we know what priorities have been considered. They're in a GIS already. We have that information from the consultant that completed that. So it will be included in the analysis process. So hopefully that answers your question.
I know it's not as detailed as you'd like it to be, or as the depth that you'd like it to be, but at this point, we are just moving forward on a Complete Streets. We haven't even received a first project yet to do. We've identified our priorities. I think we have, what, 12, 15 streets? Matt, help me. Matt, how many priorities do we have for Complete Streets? Is there 15? 40 projects, okay, but we have 15 that we've identified in the top tier. And so that, whenever one of those streets are identified, we will follow a complete process. I mean, that's what we have committed to. But not every single street in the city of Newburyport is going to be Complete Streets at this stage. Not that we won't keep adding to the 40 that we've already identified.
Well, on that note, I was just going to say that sidewalks, investing in sidewalks is probably the best way that we could promote Complete Streets policy. And so the pavement inventory that Beta did a couple years ago is really, really helpful. I don't want to lose sight of that. And again, it's a pavement management program, not just a street pavement program. So especially in my ward, the downtown ward, you have to invest in the sidewalks. They're there. We're lucky. We have them, unlike sort of ex-urban towns that don't, but we got to fix them. And on that note, I just had one question. Durability, so forget aesthetics for a minute, but we have long-term timelines as a city, 20 years, 25, 50 years, 100 years. Does asphalt and concrete last the same amount of time as sidewalk?
For sidewalks, you'll get more life out of concrete, but asphalt is half the cost and more flexible, so it does allow you some flexibility when it comes to trees and adapt, tree roots and things like that, and easy to replace in-house. So, you have to weigh the pros and cons of concrete versus asphalt. Every community is dealing with it. And then of course brick as well, how that works into it, which is.
I just have a couple questions. Do you calculate a CBV score for every street?
Yes.
And so my concern with CBV is, I think it's a great idea, but it's basically a composite score, right? You're taking the quality of the roadway plus other factors such as traffic. But that means probably you'd never get to a local street, arguably, right? Until you complete all your major collectors and your main arteries, the CBV scores on some of the tiny streets in my ward would never make the cut by that solely. Is there a control for that, or a way formulaically to say, hey, we do want to get to some of these neighborhood streets that, yeah, they don't have the car counts to justify, but they'll never, otherwise it'll be 100 years before we get to them. Do you see what I'm saying? Is there any control in there, or is that just intuitive, subjective? You look at the list and say, yeah, we've got to do a couple small streets out in the wards.
Well, there's a lot of ways to use the CBV. So you can look at it from a citywide network. That's typically the starting point in the process. But then you can drill that down. You could drill down and look at CBV by political boundaries if you wanted to. You could look at CBV by, say, any road that's a cul-de-sac or a dead end. You could say, well, let's rank all of our cul-de-sacs and dead ends by CBV. And you could start to really develop a plan within the plan, I'll say. So the CBV is really not just one unique list. It gives you the ability to use it in many different ways. So it's not just one overall analysis.
Okay, thank you. My second question, I only have three, is on the slide that you had where it shows a projection of a slide, page number 23, I think, which is the most interesting one to me. Are you moving towards making that slide that shows the roadway curb to curve plus the sidewalk improvements? Because really, it's probably not realistic to pave a road and leave the sidewalks unless the sidewalks are in good enough shape, which frankly, rarely, if you just doesn't happen. So this chart here obviously is very telling in terms of the investment we'd have to make just to stay level. But it's only half the story if the sidewalks aren't on here. So I'm thinking that these numbers are at least double to maintain the same, to have the score on the sidewalk trend the same, whatever that is linearly, and have the roads. So can you make a chart that's the same but shows both? And then the third one is, can you then add the underground stuff to that too and give us truly the whole picture to say, if you want to maintain 68.4, your D plus average you're working with, you have to spend 2, 4, and then probably 6, right? 2 for the roads, 2 for the sidewalks, and 2 for the underground. Not just spitballing, but can you make that chart?
Yeah, we can. That's part of our next steps is to integrate the sidewalk information into the analysis and also the utilities.
Okay,
Yep.
my third and final question is, so can you just, pardon the question, but can you, how much does Beta charge for this? How has it been funded? Maybe that's an Ethan question. And so once you say install a system, which implies some sort of ongoing cost, it didn't come through the council, so I just want to understand what are we spending in this endeavor for the study and for the system, and then the ongoing training and support, just to get a sense for that scope, whomever feels okay to answer.
With respect to the system, there is no cost to maintain the system. So you're using all softwares that are readily available at no cost. When we do the training program, and then we provide support as under our existing contract for a period of 12 months. So once we finish the the training program and the city's comfortable with how it works, then they can call us. We can take care of it over the phone, or we'll come here and have an on-site visit. Whatever's required. This is something that we do regularly. We have a staff of 15 people who just do this all the time.
The cost of this program?
The cost was
This current
20. It was just under. I want to say it was 19.5. I think it was 19.5 was the total amount.
It's out of Chapter 90. The other thing that I think is important to realize is that if we use Chapter 90 funds on any road, that means sidewalks and handicap ramps. And that's what's been sort of driving some of our choices, because, okay, we could go do a road, say, off of Turkey Hill or off of Hale Street that doesn't have sidewalks, because then we don't have to worry about using Chapter 90 funds. We could use, the additional funds that we've been adding outside of the 515. So that's been a challenge also for us in terms of that particular new change in the law. They change the rules, make it more expensive, yet they don't give you any more money.
Just a question. So the road surface rating, we had an average number of around 68. Is there a benchmark that we would shoot for on that average rating that would suggest or connote or give us some sort of comfort that we were in a good place? Like, is 80, a place where you're maintaining your roads properly and that you're not falling below that, the fair number where it's starting to cost you more money? Is there a number?
That's something we talked about at our last meeting, is setting some targets. So you can set a citywide target. You see the breakdown on the functional classification of road. So you saw the principal arterials were already fairly high. So you're going to set a goal for those, and then the goals with respect to the locals and the cul-de-sacs might not be as high because they're already low. So you want to look at what is attainable based on the funding that's available and develop your models based on that.
But we would want to get the really low ones at least up to the fair, because by your first slide, keeping them at fair and maintaining them at fair is more cost effective than when they fall below that period. It actually costs more money. So but is there a number, like 80 for all of our roads? Is that a benchmark, an average for all the roads?
I think where you're at right now, every community is a little bit different. When you establish we come in and do an inspection program, and the rate, you could see the slide where the ratings, varied from 58 up to 79. So it varies. I'd say here you want to establish a score that is, say, within 75 for an overall. Okay. I think we showed 72, on the forecast. Okay. And then you could set individual goals based on, again, the roadway functional class.
All right, thank you.
Richard Goulet, 25 Phillips Drive. My home I purchased in 1972. And I want to thank you. This whole process here is obviously necessary. But I just want to challenge here on page 18, which is the pavement condition of Phillips Drive. It should be highlighted all in red, and it is not. And directly behind my home is Gypsy Lane, which is, red to the state park, along as Curzon Mill Road. But with your technology, please, you really need to look at our neighborhood, which is not only Phillips Drive, but it's Ryan Road, Drew Street, and Sullivan Drive. According to our city engineer, John Eric White, the roadway is beyond its useful life. Thank you for your attention.
Come back to you. So I think there's someone back here. Hello, I just wanted to check. So the Chapter 90 money is right now just over 500,000. Is that correct? And is the bond already approved that would get us up to the 2 million? Yet to be approved. So, but we're looking now at saying 1.2 is sort of according to your assessment, about where we need to be, and 2 would be nice to have, right?
Yeah.
Am I looking at that correctly? So if, let's say we get the 2, and we approve, a couple of questions. Can we leverage, is there more Chapter 90 money at our disposal? Is the bond the only path to get to the 1.2 to 2 that we need to have? There's no other revenue generating opportunities other than the bond?
Unfortunately, that's the majority of the way that we can get funds. If we were doing a project, when we were working at the Graff Road lift station, and we were redoing that project and we bonded that, we took out, we applied for and received a MassWorks grant, and you can do sort of a combination. They gave us money towards the Graff Road lift station and towards the sidewalk, but it's rare that we can find sidewalk money, or paving money. Our best avenue at this point is to continue working with the legislature, and one of the things we've discovered is that some communities are sort of squirreling away their chapter because they get so little of it. You saw on the sheet, some people get only 250, 300,000. What did it cost for us to do? Just forget about the horrible striping, but let's just talk about what we did on High Street, that length of road and the sidewalks. What was the total? 500,000. That took that right away. What we're trying to do is identify why these other communities are holding on to their Chapter 90 money and why they're not spending it, because that is information that the legislatures have, and they're using that as a way of not giving us additional funds. So we're trying to figure out other ways to work the legislature in terms of getting Chapter 90 money in the formula reworked. At this point, we are looking at probably 1.5 to 2 million. We've been sort of working with that number in order to look at how we can bond that for next year. Going out beyond that for any additional length of time could potentially put our city finances in a difficult position, as well as jeopardize our AAA bond rating. But we were talking today about the possibility of what if the order said something like, we bond, identify in November what we need to bond, evaluate all the work we've done for roads and sidewalks, look at our pavement management plan, and identify this is what we accomplished this year. We know what the weather conditions were, what we didn't spend, what we're carrying over, like what happened on Merrimack Street, and then work to figure out the next year. What is it that we can afford, and what is it that we can put forward in terms of bonding for more roads and sidewalks?
Got it. Thank you. So just one follow-up question. Let's say we get the 1.5 or the 2, whatever it is, through bonding. What is the best way as a citizen to help allocate the funds to my particular street? If I look at the map and say my street's a red street, and we got the 2 million, how do I get my street paved? It's a red street. We got the money.
What's the next step? Who do I go to?
You talk to your ward counselor because we're going to have the councils will be involved in this. You certainly can call me. You certainly can call
But is it
DPS.
this, I understand that, but it still feels like a broken process, that's a squeaky wheel process. And if your ward counselor is vocal and he listens to you and you have the time to go, there's a detailed assessment that tells us the exact condition of every road. Is that being used to allocate the funds, or is it based on ward counselor activity?
This is new. This is new.
But answer the question.
Which is, are we going to use this data to allocate funding for roads? Yes. This is why we did this process.
Not to allocate the funds, to determine
which roads?
Yeah, who
well,
goes
I think
first?
the one thing that
to
we
prioritize the spending of the funding.
Correct. One thing we haven't done to date is we haven't taken care of roads that are fair. And that was very clear through this analysis, that we can keep roads from deteriorating to a point that they'll cost twice as much to fix. So we're going to add fair roads for the first time into the mix, as well as poor roads. So we're just figuring this out and just getting the data at this point. And we really looked at trying to, in the past, allocate the resources amongst the 6 wards where we could, where the highest priority were. And then sometimes what happens is we have a terrible winter and our plans are all blown up because all of a sudden a road just falls apart. So we're going to try to really implement this paving management plan, keep it very transparent, and to continue. I mean, I think as you saw the chart, we have been putting more money towards roads and sidewalks every single year. And we're really trying to do that. We had a lot of competing capital needs initially 10 years ago when my administration took office: schools, senior center, water plant, wastewater plant. I mean, there were a lot of capital needs as a result of, just years and years and years of deferred maintenance. So we're really checking off the list, and we're now really trying to put more money towards roads and sidewalks. And, I know we have to address some of the ones that are really poor, but we also have to protect those that we can save and get another 5, 6, 7, 8 years out of too. So it's a new approach. We haven't done that before. Where do you live?
Arlington Street.
Ah, yes. Arlington's bad.
Thank you.
It's poor.
Please keep in mind, too, to answer a second part of that question, utilities.
Right.
Everybody has to remember utilities. You have major utilities under every one of these roads. You have gas, water, sewer, and drain. That all comes into play with this analysis.
And once you start adding, for example, Dove Street, just to do the utilities alone there, wasn't that about $500,000?
Merrill Street.
Merrill Street is another example of that. Columbus, we just finished doing the gas line, and now we have to do the water line, some repairs to sewer, then we can pave. So, yes.
Quick question. During the process of deciding which roads are going to be done and when, is there going to be any thought given to rerouting some of the traffic? Because I live on Lime Street, and I mean, if you put new sidewalks on Lime Street, I can tell you those curbs are going to be ruined because it's at the lower Lime. People go up on the curve because the traffic going back and forth, there's just not enough room.
Well,
So I'm
I think there's
wondering-
been conversations about whether or not that road should become one-way anyway,
Yeah.
because it is so narrow and maybe
Right.
parking on one side. And I think once we look at a road like Lower Lime Street, which clearly needs some attention from the Brown School probably purchased to the end of
Yeah.
the street, that at that point you really have to look at, if we invest all this money into the road and into some sidewalks, what's the best way to protect this? Like, for example, when we did the sidewalks in front of the Sullivan Building, what's one of the things that always happens there? The fire trucks. They pull up onto the sidewalk because of having to go into the Sullivan Building all the time. I told the fire department they cannot go on the sidewalks anymore because the trucks will destroy them.
Well,
So
that's-
those are the kinds of things we have to look at, usage and how we can protect the investment. So
Okay, thanks.
we'll have more conversations about that, and you've got your ward counselor, and I know Lime Street is split between 2 wards, but I think that those are the kinds of conversations that we really have to have.
Yeah, because as you know, there's a lot of construction that's been going on Lime, and there's no point in redoing the sidewalks if people are going to pull up onto the sidewalks because you can't get up or down the street.
Right. A very good point. Thank you.
Hi there. My wife and I are residents of Coombs Circle, and there was a project done, sidewalk project done there not too long ago along Noble Street, which is on the corner of where our house is. And one of the questions I have for you folks is, what about quality control after the fact? The sidewalks, the roads are all done, and lines notwithstanding. But for the sidewalk project next to our house, as a for instance, and the DPS director agreed that the job that was done, although the sidewalk itself was fine, the grass work and the curbing, which is non-existent, was hideous and needed to be redone. We've talked about it ad nauseum with city councilors and everybody else without too many results, but a promise of something happening sometime because, and this is part 2 of my statement, which is that Noble Street, which is listed as poor, from what I could tell, is in dire need for several different reasons, one of which being the condition of the pavement, but also there's no drainage.
Right.
And it has been flooding onto Coombs Circle as part of that because there's no place for the water to go. There's no conveyance system. So I guess part 1, what's the quality assurance and accountability once the project has been done? Number 2, in terms of sequencing, I think Mr. Vogel, is that your name? Are these projects going to happen so that, yes, they're going to be doing pavement, but also there's infrastructure that has to be done and should be done first and then the paving?
Correct. I mean, that's always the plan we try to use. When Coombs Circle, it was identified by the ward council as one of the drainage projects on the list. Because it was a smaller project, it fell a little further down, like East Boylston, but they are on the list. We started with some of the major projects that have been done in terms of drainage. We had finished a drainage bond, and I went to the city council and said, okay, let's roll over this bond because we know we have tremendous drainage issues across the city. So give me the next one. So Coombs is on that, and anything that happens regarding paving or sidewalks, additional work, the drainage has to happen first. Otherwise, as you said, the quality control is just not there.
And what about in terms of that follow-up of ensuring that whatever contractor's hired to do the work, that they're held accountable for the quality of the work?
We typically do, in terms of, I mean, I know when some people have chose to do their own sidewalks. This is why we set specs. And they have to pull permits, and there's very specific specifications. We didn't have them before. These are just about, 5 years old, 4 years old? And we found that this was happening. People were kind of, letting DPS know they were doing their sidewalks. They'd come and pull the curb, and then it was just sort of, okay, well, we'll just throw some bricks down or we'll pour some concrete. So now they have to follow very specific specifications in order to do their sidewalks, which is new. Okay, so, all right. Do you know who the contractor was?
I'm afraid I don't.
Do you? It was?
That's the area that we did the
They usually do a better job than that. We'll take a look at it again. Okay, thank you. Yep.
So I'm wondering if you do use asphalt, would it be permeable? That's one question. Another question is, I suppose you think you can use all $2 million in a year? So, what if you don't? What if you only use $1 million, and then the next year you can
It rolls over.
do more expensive projects? Yeah.
It depends. I mean, we've done that before, where we haven't been able to spend money we've allocated because of weather conditions or contractors. They're just not available. I mean, that happens. There's only so many pavers out there. And so what happens is we, keep the money in an account, and then we roll it over and then add more projects to it. So
So this 5-year project could become 7 years, conceivably.
the what? I'm sorry?
This 5-year project
Sure.
could become longer.
You could add another year or two to it, certainly.
But then, of course, the cost of doing these, you know, what would cost one amount in year one will cost a lot more in year 5. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's
It's always, I
tricky.
mean, with cost of, asphalt is a petroleum-based
know it.
product,
I
so it
know
just
it.
keeps going up. So, you know, it's
tricky.
And that's why it's so frustrating working with the state, because our costs are all going up. They're putting more demands on us, yet they're not increasing our Chapter 90 funds. So we're doing as much as we can. But that's a good question.
What about permeable?
I don't know about that. Asphalt, permeable? Porous pavement? In some places, does it make sense to do that?
Well, it does, but there's been issues with it where it doesn't get porous anymore. The dirt gets in it and it controls it from not leaching through.
And it ends up causing more problems.
Right.
Okay.
You need to maintain it.
It's a maintenance.
You need to sweep it. Basically you vacuum it to maintain that permeability. So there is additional maintenance.
That sounds like another piece of major equipment that we would need to buy for DPS.
We've
No.
seen some towns or colleges do parking lots.
Well, I can understand that, like maybe on the waterfront, we do that for, you know, because we would want something that would be less, sure, it would really be a problem. Yeah, yeah. Barbara?
I have a question about the study that was done. I'm kind of depressed about the smaller roads. I've been a smaller road that's been ignored for many years. It never was paved by the city at all. So I'm wondering, in the study that you did you think of, I know it costs less if you do a smaller road, if you're doing a larger road, to take the smaller roads that are abut the larger road and try to at least do 1 or 2 of the smaller roads, because the asphalt is if you do these projects in a combined way, it's less money. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right, Barbara, and we have done that.
Okay, well,
But for you, it's doing the drainage first, and that's in the process of being evaluated. I mean, we.
no, I understand that.
And that's, so and do they have any infrastructure underneath there that needs to be done on East Boylston? No. So it's just trying to figure out where the water's going, and that we thought we had it identified, and then found out when there was a more, I don't know, advanced storm, if you will, and we found out the water was going in other places that we hadn't identified. So they're working on that in terms of trying to figure out the best drainage solution first, and then the paving. I know they did some patching down there for you, but it's not.
It's not working.
I know, it doesn't last, it doesn't stay, but, you know, you're on the drainage list too, as Coombs.
Okay, all right, thank you.
We're checking them off. We're moving through the list. We are. We had about 9 on that list.
Hi, I just want to underscore what this gentleman was talking about relative to Coombs Circle. I live on Coombs Circle as well, 10 Coombs Circle, and you say we're on this list, and this has been going on for a long time. I've been there 30 years. 25 years ago, I went down and talked to these folks about the same drainage issue, and I think it was 25 years ago, same thing. I was on this list. They know the issue is there. It overflows. It's terrible there at the end of the circle. Matter of fact, it comes all the way down, and one of the neighbors had to get someone in to fix the drainage because it was going in their basement.
House.
Right in their house.
Yeah.
So they had to fix that because the city didn't fix the drainage down the other end. But again, the list is there, I get it, but when does it come up?
So we've probably tackled we had 9 projects on this list, and actually we added a 10th. We did Tilton, we did Colton, and Low, we did.
Parts of Phillips Drive, Coombs Circle and East Boylston are on that list.
Yeah, so you're right on the top now, because we've done 4.
Yeah,
The other one that we've been.
It's taken 25 years to get there.
But you weren't on my list, sir. I'm sorry. You've
Okay.
only been on. You've only been on the new drainage list for probably 2 years.
Okay. Yeah.
So, you know,
I get it, it's been a long time.
but you are really close to the top of the list at this point.
Thank you.
Especially the other piece is that one of the big problems we have is we have to raise Malcolm Hoyt in the business park. And when we first looked at that, we thought it would be about 450 to 500,000, and now it's closer to 950, which is essentially the bond we took out to do these drainage projects. But the other piece that we didn't have before is the fact that probably a year from January, we will have a full-blown marijuana cultivation center in the park, and that's supposed to be generating about $1 million a year to the city for 5 years. The first, so we're thinking of, instead of using the drainage funds to raise Malcolm Hoyt, we'll take a separate bond for that and then pay it off with the pot money, and then be able to do more drainage projects too. So we're trying to be as creative as possible here in terms of how we can address some of these. And I appreciate your patience on that, but I assure you Coombs is coming up.
Good evening. My name is Mike Lambert. I live on Merrimack Street. And my question is, I've seen, it might have been some of it last summer, maybe this summer, but I've seen the video crews out checking out pipes. I saw a crew down on Water Street, and I think I did see some early in the season up on High Street. And I didn't hear anything. I asked a couple of questions. What were the results of those films, and how many miles of sewer have you checked in the city? And wouldn't that be driving a lot of the direction related to what streets need to be done? You just talked about a street where you still had a gas line to do before you did the final repair. So I would like to know about the condition of the streets. But the last thing I wanted to, is just one quick story I heard recently about a fellow, a homeowner, who's having a problem with his own house to street sewer line. And he was waiting. I said, well, why doesn't he get it fixed? And well, he was waiting because there's some penalty should the fellow dig up the street in front of his house within some time period, because the street had recently been resurfaced. Years ago in Exeter, New Hampshire, when we redid all of our water and sewer and did that separation project, we had a large VA home section, J.D. Hill. It's right off of Portsmouth Avenue. Perhaps some of you have driven through it. Small Cape-size homes that were all Cedarburg piping. And when we went through there and redid their water and sewer lines, the city, this town, offered the homeowners a program where they would help them with the charges of replacing their water and sewer to their house. So I wondered if the city had something like that, or if they were in the midst of doing a whole street over, whether they couldn't offer to some, I'm sure a lot of homes need new water lines and sewer lines pulled, or, you know.
We actually,
Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you for your question. We actually did this out on Plum Island with, when they brought water and sewer out to Plum Island, there were pretty hefty betterments that the residents out there had to step up in order to get water and sewer to their homes. And we also have a betterment process on Low Street when we put in that major water line, and anyone who ties into that system now currently has to cough up some money to help. And we use that funds to replace other, to continue expanding the capital work that needs to happen with our water lines. But Jamie, could you answer in terms of the camera? Because that was the water lines you camera, right?
No, sewer lines.
Sewer?
Yep. So I'll answer the last question first and work my way backwards. Does that sound right? All right. So as far as offering homeowners services, we actually do, but it's the homeowner's cost. So we'll stub off from the mains, and then the homeowner can pay the contractor to actually connect from the house to the main if we're redoing a street. So that is off it. It just would be at the homeowner's cost to come to where we actually stub it out. As far as the sewer lines go, yes, the sewer lines, we are very on top of cameraing sewer lines. I'd probably say about 60% of the city has been cambered. The difficulty is the water lines, because the difference between a water and sewer line is sewer line is gravity, which means that we can pop a manhole, camera, open the manhole downstream and pull out the camera. Whereas water is basically under pressure. So we're only going off of the age of the pipe that's in the ground. So if the pipe is, like Tony said earlier, 1800s, we're just assuming that it has to be replaced.
Until it breaks.
Right. So if we're doing a total street reclamation or mill and overlay. The reason why you saw the trucks out there on High Street and Merrimack Street is because we knew that those two streets were getting paved this year, so we just wanted to double check and to let you know that the sewer lines are fine on both of those streets, hence we paved them. Number three, your first question was that's not necessarily true as far as the gentleman that's waiting. There is a 5-year, we usually don't let you cut into the street once it's paved. However, emergencies supersede that. If there's a sewer or water emergency, you absolutely can cut into the street. You come like anybody else down to the DPS, you get a permit, or your contractor would get a permit, and you would just be responsible for the actual patchwork in the street for about a year. Not you, the contractor, for about a year after the fact.
My question is more towards eliminating as much as we can moving forward after we've paved the street, going, I mean, look where this is Market Street, the YMCA. It looks like somebody's, dug that up all the way down. It's a series of patches. We probably see breaks and service breaks and all of that. And I just haven't heard from the city yet. I haven't seen anything in the papers, and I haven't seen any big holes in town.
Yeah.
Big pipes on the grass. I haven't seen that. I'm just wondering, where is that? It seems like it's time. It's time.
We've
So
done
are
it
you
in isolated places. Low Street, that was a huge project that we did. Hale Street, Toppins, Columbus.
Merrill Street,
Dove.
we left stubs all the way up and down the street. That's why you won't see any.
So the homeowners did not afford themselves the opportunity in those cases. So there will be people that may have problems in their home, and as they decide,
Right.
then the holes will appear in the streets, in the sidewalks. Is that right? Yeah.
Well, there wouldn't be. Well.
But there's an assessment, though. When you open up a road and you're doing the water, sewer, and gas line, which we've done in several situations, I can remember this specifically on Merrill Street, where we looked at all the connections up and down the street and looked at the status of them and whether or not they needed to be redone. And worked with the homeowner in terms of whether or not they wanted to, well, they had to upgrade in some situations because they wouldn't have lasted.
But yeah, and yes, and the difference between what you're asking and what the mayor's saying is on Merrill Street itself, we replaced the water and sewer mains. So that's why those were exposed at that time, and that's why we left the stubs moving forward. That wasn't just a reclamation or a mill and overlay for the street. The difference is when we camera a road, we're looking at the mains. We have some availability to look at the services. However, I can't look up a service. I can only go straight in the main, have the camera tilt, look at the actual structure of the inlet coming in, but I can't tell you the condition past the first 5 feet. So, it's a crapshoot when that happens, but we don't get down. The difference between Merrill Street and we'll say High Street and Merrimack Street, Merrill was a full water, a full sewer, everything was getting replaced, whereas this is we're talking just pavement here.
You also, can you just real quick look for illegal sump pump?
Yep, that's we've done a smoke test in 1999 where the entire city was smoke tested and illicit discharges were found. Welcome.
The water main on Merrimack Street was replaced in 1999 from the roundabout where it is over to, I think, 10th Street. So that's less than 20 years old.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Bruff. I live on Lower Smith Street in the South End. Question, I hear and understand that certainly what is beneath the pavement impacts the overall cost of replacement, repair, whatever. That's logical. My concern is I've owned my property for 21 years. The street's never been paved. There's a lot of small streets in the South End that fall under the same, auspice, same under umbrella. Is the overarching cost, because of, I'm sure our infrastructure underneath those small South End roads is poor, is that going to impact the prioritization of when these streets are going to get fixed? Because a lot of them just don't have any more life left. I mean, every spring they are patched after, the winter. There are craters in some of these streets. And it's just concerning for all of us in that neighborhood, the continuation of the deterioration of the streets.
I absolutely understand. Being a South End, having lived in the South End now for 30 years, I understand exactly what you're saying. And I think that once we have all of the data and we can identify, we can let you know which streets are in need of water and or sewer and gas. There's a rating of ABC with gas lines, and so we've really pushed them even if they're not, at a point where they're considered an A1 or whatever their rating is, because if we're ripping up a road and doing water sewer, we want the gas line done too, and they've been pretty cooperative with us about that. So we will, when we finish this evaluation, we will take a look at some of the roads in particular that are listed as the poorest, and we can begin to look at the infrastructure under there and sort of make some decisions about what we can do there.
Okay, maybe I missed it, but what's the time frame for that, please?
January? January. So we're close. I mean, this is why we thought this was a good time to come in, because I know that the councilors, really want to move forward on identifying some additional funding for roads and sidewalks in this next construction season that starts April 1st, and we'd like to have contractors lined up January 1st so we can really hit the road running, or paving on April 1st. So, but we will be sure to do a follow-up, and probably we should do it by ward. Maybe that makes the most sense in terms of meeting with the ward councilor and going over what the findings are and which roads in the wards are going to need some infrastructure and which are not. You're welcome.
I was curious about the drainage issues.
Mhm.
And like, is there a common cause for that kind of stuff? And is there any recourse to
So
developers
many reasons
either
why
in
drainage
the
issues
past or going
happen.
forward? I'm sorry?
Andy, there's a lot of reasons why there's drainage issues. Some of it, like Malcolm Hoyt, the road needs to come up. On Hale Street, we've got a collapsed culvert. We've got, there's no drainage on Coombs. So, I mean.
But how does that happen? Is that because
It's
developers?
the way it was designed. The city's old. Some places there just wasn't drainage put in.
Right.
And so we're trying to, take care of some of those pieces, and others there, what is the strange drainage at the end of Bromfield Street where it backs up, or we have to keep checking this like sort of outflow, which is like, it was like antiquated in terms of the way they designed some of this stuff that we have to try and keep on top of to ensure, the drainage that we can.
Could you talk about how much of the actual paving and sidewalk work is done, like, contracting out? How much is done by the city themselves? And is this a time to, reconfigure that equation? And if there's a lot of work to be done, does it make sense to bring more of it in-house?
Well, no, because then we wouldn't be able to do anything else except paving and sidewalks, and there's a lot of DPS work that has to happen throughout the city. And there was I guess, a conscious decision made probably, we at one point had like 60 DPS workers, and there were sidewalk crews who were trained in doing cement, but, pouring cement, but we don't have the equipment to do roads, and that would be tremendously costly to purchase the kind of equipment to do roads. I mean, I would love it if we could do some more sidewalks. We've had crews resetting bricks like on In Street and that kind of thing in the summer, but it really is pretty costly to bring in crews just to do that. But, we're always looking at any way we can get, more for a bang for our buck, if you will.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Hi, I really appreciate all the city officials trying to address this issue. I'm new to town about 5 years, and I'm an avid bike rider, and I bike in West Newbury and Newbury because those roads are nice and smooth. But I have to get there.
But wait, those are state roads.
All of them?
Well, the 113, Scotland Road. I just want to say.
But my question is, and I really appreciate you're addressing an issue that has been on the back burner for a long time. So I applaud you for that. My question is, at one point, will it be on a website where we can see where our street, because I could see my street was in red, but will I get to see?
What's your street, sir?
Pardon?
What street are you on?
Bennett Drive.
I'm sorry?
Bennett Drive.
Oh, mm-hmm.
And we're talking about a dollar figure, but we can't lose sight of the fact that it also, with quality of life, it's a health and safety issue. with the kids riding their bikes and they hit that frost heave, and people are now coming off of Turkey Hill. They don't want to wait at that intersection anymore to get onto 113 to take a left, so they're starting to come down, and an accident's going to happen. And part of it is the status of the roads. So I do appreciate what we're doing. I just want to know if I can see where my street is. A gentleman alluded to the fact earlier that will it come down to activism in the neighborhood? You know, should I start going door to door? Because again, that squeaky wheel gets the grease type of thing. So
I think it's appropriate to wait until
absolutely.
until we have the infrastructure
I
information, and then I think we can sit down and work with the counselors and work with the residents and the wards. And I mean, again, I think one of the things that I think I tried to say very clearly is that we haven't done work to keep fair roads fair. So that, you know, we let them deteriorate and then they need a total reclamation or a mill and overlay. They need more work than they, you know, if we had done something maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we might have been able to save a road or bide some time. So this is what this pavement management plan is going to help us do. So we'll be able to look at some of the smaller roads, maybe that we could do something that wouldn't be very costly this coming season and be able to get another 5, 7, 8 years out of a road. And I think that that's important too, but we really do need to understand the infrastructure needs of each of the roads, because there's no way you can pave a road, I think as the woman from Lois Road was saying, unless if we know that we need to replace water, sewer, or gas.
No, and I don't want to sit here pitting neighborhoods against neighborhoods.
And I don't want to do that either.
That's not the purpose.
Right. But I think we're trying to develop a different approach, because we've certainly made some headway in the last 10 years, but because there's so many roads and sidewalks that need to be done. But you know, maybe West Newbury, their main roads look better, but all the other little communities around the North Shore, you know, that you drive on, they have a lot of roads that look like ours. I just wish we could get more Chapter 90 money. But, you know, again, we've tackled a lot of capital needs in the city, and we're beginning now to look at being able to put more, hopefully, free cash towards roads and sidewalks this year, in addition to the bonding money and the 500. But we also have to be sure we're using it, because one of the things that you've noticed is the high cost of bonding. And if we're going to be carrying, you know, millions of dollars in bonding fees and not using the money, that could have been 4 roads that could have been done. So we've got to make that balance too. That's why I think it makes a lot more sense to do things year by year, and so we're not holding on to money with extravagant bonding carrying costs when we could actually be doing work. But thank you.
I just want to, Art Courier, I live on State Street. I used to live off of Merrimack Street, so I have a different paving situation in front of me. It's fantastic. But I want to say that this is unbelievably positive. We've got a management plan and a very professional organization that we can all stand behind because of how professional they are. And when you want to plan the work the plan, then we can get away from having to react and over-respond at sometimes and under-respond. So I'm very appreciative of the work this team's done, where you're going, and God bless.
Thank you, Art. Appreciate it. All right, why don't we take one more question?
Rob Germanaro, 2 Ashland Street. I want to thank Mr. Garo for making this pretty easy to understand. I mean, a D+ rating for the city of Newburyport is not encouraging, but to follow Mr. Currier's words, I'm encouraged by what I see here tonight. Although today is October 22nd, 2019, and then a couple of years ago I sat in subcommittee meetings where the DPS was involved. I'm not going to blame Mr. Fenari or Mr. Tucolo. They're doing a good job, but the city ordinances in place that need to be followed, and they're not being followed. So moving forward, I don't want to hear, as a taxpayer, that we're not going to follow the city ordinance because we can get more sidewalks done or anything of that nature. A perfect example is High Street. And I'm not talking about the paving itself. I'm talking about the sidewalk work that was done, Mary Hasslinger had a sidewalk there from the 1940s, the Work Project Administration, that was in better shape than sidewalks of Port a month ago. The work is not quality. Another perfect example is Spofford Street. You have concrete sidewalks and granite curbing that are beautiful, done 5 years ago. And further up, where there was never a sidewalk, you now have concrete sidewalks with hot top curbing. And then in between all that, we have a beautiful concrete sidewalk that the neighbors must be thrilled about with no curbing. So I would rather do less sidewalks and less roads and do them correctly so that we don't have to go back. It would take that chart that you have there and make it more efficient. I'm going to go down to Merrimack Street. I'm on National Street, probably in Councilor Tontai could attest to this, on the second worst street in Ward 4, which is Ashland Street, Plummer being the worst, in my opinion, and maybe in Councilor Tontai's. On Merrimack Street, from the roundabout to Ashland Street, we've done some very high-quality work, granite curbing, concrete sidewalks. And then we've done this granite curbing and hot-top sidewalks. I've had taxpayers say to me, why did I get the hot top rub? And I don't have an answer for them. And we're just going to let it go, and we're going to move on, and we're going to have this wonderful study. And as Mr. Currier said, a very important and positive program here, and we're just going to let this stuff go. Well, I'm not going to let that stuff go. I want it fixed. There shouldn't be any work done next year 10 feet beyond Ashland Street on Merrimack, heading towards Kent Street, until we go back up from Ashland Street to the Pioneer Park and take out all the bread loaf curbing that's in there and fix all the sidewalks there. Again, I would rather do less roadways and sidewalks, but do them correctly so we don't have to go back and do them again. And I think that's all I have to say here. Although I will reiterate the point that I sat in those subcommittee meetings, chaired by Councilor Eigenman, I believe, and standards were set, and they were put in black and white, and they aren't being followed, and I want them followed from here on forward. Today's October 22nd, 2019. I don't want to talk about this again next year. I'd like to keep it positive like Art was talking about. Thank you.
Thank you all. I appreciate you all being here. Well, to be continued.